Hello and welcome to our seasonal sampler series where each week you explore one or more quilting skills while working on small calendar quilts. In this video you'll get some tips for improving your sewing accuracy when constructing this 6-inch log cabin block, which is part of our springtime sampler. Ready to begin? Below you'll find the Springtime Sampler supply list along with links to this log cabin pattern and to the other videos mentioned in this tutorial. If you just want to make one log cabin block, you'll need fabric scraps, let's say about 2.5 inches by at least 6.5 inches long, or you can get 1/8 of a yard of 3 to 5 different fabrics. For more information about choosing fabrics for log cabin blocks, check out our video about the secondary designs that result from your fabric choices. Log cabin blocks start with a square or rectangle in the center, which is symbolic of the hearth in the center of a home. This is surrounded by rectangles or the logs in the cabin. The size of the center and the number and width of the logs can vary depending on the look that you desire. You'll want to bring your A game when constructing this 6-inch block, as it contains 9 different pieces. Generally speaking, the more pieces, the greater chance you have of ending up with a block that isn't the correct size. For example, let's say that for each one of these seams, you're just 1/16 off that 1/4 inch seam allowance. No big deal, but look at all the seams that are here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So by the time you get all the logs on, you'll end up being 6/16 or 3/8 of an inch off overall. The only way to fix the problem would be to rip out the seams, and you don't want to do that. So for this block, you really need to concentrate on being precise with your cutting, sewing, and pressing. You'll find the cutting sizes for this block on the handout. As always, before cutting, make sure your fabric has been pressed. You can use your mat or this handout for double checking your accuracy. If you find that you're off a little, look for reasons why this is so. Instead of just cutting a piece like this using your ruler, try using the lines on your board along with your ruler. Line up your ruler on the vertical lines along with these horizontal lines on your mat. Always cut forward and away from your body. Cutting across your body might save time, but it can cause inaccuracy. Take the time to reposition yourself and cut forward. I find that rulers like this with these thin black lines work best for cutting perfect pieces. Some folks complain about not being able to see these thin lines, but a well-lighted workspace will help. And last but not least, if you're still having problems, you might want to check your equipment. This ruler is about 20 years old, and I have little chips on the corners from using it so often. This can cause problems with your precision. Mats should always be flat. Sometimes they'll get wavy from improper storage, and this can also cause problems with your accuracy. Lay out your pieces on a board or a piece of cardboard in the order that you'll sew. A is in the center, B is on top, B2 is on the side, C1, C2. Notice that these logs spin out in a circular motion around the center of the block. You'll be sewing from the inside out in this order. Take the first 2 pieces and put right sides together. Line up your pieces across the top and on both of the ends. I usually don't pin, but it's okay if you feel more comfortable pinning this in place. Start with the scrap. I call this a leader. I'll stitch onto that piece. I'll double check to make sure everything's lined up, and also a scant 1/4 inch seam. This is my 1/4 inch foot. I've lined up my fabric about maybe a thread over this way, or a thread to half a thread over this way from the edge of that foot. If you don't have a 1/4 inch foot, you can use the lines on your machine for guidance. And if you come about You come over about a thread or a line over from that 1/4 inch mark. That's where your scant 1/4 inch seam is. I don't want to pull or push when I'm sewing. Notice I just barely have my hands on this piece as it goes through. As a matter of fact, sometimes I just like to direct that with the tip of my scissors. You want to make sure when you come off of this piece that you come straight off. So I get my follower ready and I sew onto that. I'll press this seam to B. When I start sewing a new block with lots of seams, I like to double check my sewing with the pattern before I go any further. You could draw the seam allowance onto the original pattern for a check, or you can download this accuracy check sheet that I printed up. Looks good. Put your piece back on the board. Last piece sewn is on top. Put right sides together. Line up across the top and on either end and sew. I press the seams towards the outside edge. I'll check for accuracy on this handout. Place your piece back on the board. The last piece sewn is here and I like it to always be on top. So I'll turn my board to the left. This is one of the systems I use to keep me organized. The last piece sewn is on top and I'm ready to put right sides together and sew. Without a system in place to keep you organized, it's very easy to get confused where your next piece goes. I started this in the red center, last piece sewn on top, and next piece goes here. Last piece sewn goes on top, the next piece goes here. Last piece sewn goes on top, and the next piece goes here. This started okay with the last piece sewn on top, but then I think I started daydreaming and I picked up the next piece and put it here, and the next piece went here, and then all of a sudden it clicks and I say, wait a minute, last piece sewn goes on top and the next piece goes here. That doesn't look right. Actually, I could sew it on this side and this block will end up being the mirror image of this, but it won't fit right into the pattern. Make sure you stay focused and organized when sewing. So where were we? Oh yeah, last piece sewn goes on top. Put right sides together and stitch. Continue in this manner till all the logs have been stitched in place. Double checking your seams will ensure your block will end up measuring 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches when all the logs have been added. Once you make a few rounds, you might find that you can do away with all this checking and just sew. If you find that your pieces aren't fitting into the pattern, you'll have to do a systems check. Start with pressing. Pressing is often overlooked when problems arise, which is a shame because it should be looked at first since it's the easiest to fix. When I investigate it further, I notice that there's a tuck in here. I'll press that out. And presto, perfect! I like to use a hot dry iron when pressing because steam can sometimes distort the fabric. Get in the habit of moving the iron in up-down motion rather than pushing and pulling back and forth. Always press after sewing before adding another seam. First, register your seams by pressing down. This helps the threads to nestle down into the fabric. Pull your fabric back and press. Often I use the straight lines on this cover to help me keep everything lined up. When I'm dealing with tricky bias seams, I like to press on a towel as it seems to keep everything in place. Hope these tips lead you to a perfect log cabin block. By the way, there are many different methods for making log cabin blocks. If the thought of focusing on being precise makes you anxious, you might like to try paper piecing log cabins. You don't have to worry so much about your cutting sizes and seam allowances. If you can sew on a line, you'll do well. Another suggestion is to try a crazy log cabin block. Once again, You don't have to worry much about seam allowance or precise cutting sizes. In our next video in our seasonal sampler series, you'll learn some more applique techniques to add to your quilting toolbox while completing this springtime sampler. Thanks for visiting LearnHowToQuilt.com. Please share our videos with your friends. Happy sewing!